Please stay tuned to the end of this program or see the show notes for important information regarding today's speakers and the content of this podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Allergy Talk, a roundup of the latest in the field of allergy and immunology by the American College of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. For today, we are excited to present a special episode of Allergy Talk. The current Allergy Watch issue covers articles from the American Board of Allergy and Immunology Continuous Assessment Program. Therefore, for the next 2 podcasts, we're going to interview experts in the field of allergy immunology. So if you have a topic you'd like to cover in a future podcast, please let us know at allergytalk, one word, at acaai.org. So welcome everyone. My name is Jerry Lee. I'm an associate professor at Emory University and the co-host of Allergy Talk. I'm also an assistant editor of Allergy Watch, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Kalangara.
Hi, this is Marian Kalangara, and I'm also an assistant professor of allergy and immunology at Emory University.
And we are very excited to have a guest on this off-allergy watch issue of Allergy Talk. I'd like to introduce Dr. Jennifer Shih. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I think this is a great program. I am an assistant professor at Emory University. And today we're going to be talking about telemedicine and how you can incorporate that into your potential allergy practice.
So I'm going to be the first to admit that despite having worked with Jen for the last 3 years, I still don't know a lot about telemedicine, and I actually don't know anyone else in our field who does telemedicine. How'd you even get interested in this?
Well, yeah, I mean, you are not alone in that. In fact, recently there's a JAMA article that came out earlier this year in January 2019 showing what subspecialties actually utilize telemedicine the most. And our field in allergy was dead last out of all the subspecialties at about 6% only utilizing telemedicine in their practice. And it's something that, is here today. And if you're not familiar with it or know something about it and maybe not involved with it, you may be left behind because it's something that has low overhead, reduces costs, increases convenience, and people just seem to want it. And how I got into it, just like a lot of things in life that are unexpected, I kind of got into it for personal reasons originally. I mean, I sort of like techie kind of things and new technology that can be utilized to help our practices. But for me, I actually had a heart transplant several years ago. And so part of my practice was trying to make sure that I stayed healthy by not being exposed to a lot of, infectious respiratory problems. And for me to do that, telemedicine fit that quite well. So that's how I started doing it, so that though I can be face-to-face with the patient, I am not in the same room, so therefore I don't have as much risk of getting sick for myself.
So tell me about your current telemedicine practice. What are you doing right now?
So there are different types of telemedicine, and some people may not be aware of that, but there's the asynchronous type and the synchronous type. So asynchronous is done via not in real time. So that means that it's something, for example, like teleradiology, where there's an image that's taken and then assessed at a later time. So again, not in real time. Synchronous is done in real time. So generally that's done with video conferencing, and if it's facilitated with equipment where you're doing a full physical exam as well. So in that synchronous type, you have the facilitated or non-facilitated type. And facilitated type is what I do currently. And the way that works is you actually have a facilitator, usually a nurse, but you can actually get a license currently to become a telemedicine facilitator as a job. And it differs from state to state what that person's credentials have to be as a facilitator. But essentially, that means you have someone with the patient helping to facilitate the exam in itself and the visit. The non-facilitated type would be something like if you were doing Uber, or sometimes it's called on-demand telemedicine. So that would be where you would just get on a mobile device or your computer and just see a physician or provider in that manner, and there's not an E&M code billed for that. It's cash pay. Okay, so those are the two different types. Sort of the growth has been more exponential in the non-facilitated type more recently because of issues with facilitated types and regulations, parity of pay between states, and that kind of thing.
So, you're most familiar with this facilitated type telemedicine, so I'd love to know more about your experience. Since you've seen patients obviously live and through facilitated telemedicine, what would be the experience for someone who's never done it before?
Right. So I really love it, and I find that the patients really love it. In fact, my patient satisfaction scores are higher in the telemedicine clinic than in the in-person clinic. I'm not sure what that says. Not sure what that says about me, but during a facilitated telemedicine visit, it seems to go smoother. I can actually see more patients in the same time period during that telemedicine visit than in an in-person visit. And there's some literature out there about that being consistent in other clinics as well. So I see mostly pediatric patients currently in the telemedicine clinic. And what's great about it is that they love seeing their own boogers in their nose on a big screen. They love seeing their eardrum on the big screen. And so they tend to sit still for those things because they think it's really cool to see it on the screen. And then the whole family sees it too. And, when do you actually get to see your own eardrum or inside your own nose? So they really enjoy that. And then they like seeing, I think, me on the camera even. And I do things like give them high fives through the camera,
oh, wow.
that kind of thing. And so, I think it's novel and that they really enjoy it, and the parents enjoy it too because it's very convenient for them. So, one of the benefits of telemedicine is that you may not have to drive several hours to see a specialist. So, for example, I do have a success story, and I will also utilize both my in-person and telemedicine visits for some of these patients. So there's this one patient of mine that I often share who had been coming to our severe asthma clinic and our main campus in person. Now, this patient had been intubated 3 times previously, was sort of labeled as risk of death type of asthma, and was missing their once-a-month severe asthma clinic visits. But realistically, he lives 4 hours away from our severe asthma clinic and is in a single parent home and with difficulty traveling up here to come to the clinic visits. And so, I think sometimes we as physicians, think, well, they're missing their appointments and they're being non-compliant. But in reality, there is real life for them, and it's difficult for them to have that access. So instead, since they live near one of my facilitated sites for telemedicine, we had them start coming to that clinic. And now he's quite a success story because he's in high school now. He has not had an exacerbation that required an ED visit or hospitalization for 2 years now, and he plays basketball. And he corrects his mom on how to use his inhalers because he actually showed up to clinic once a month on a regular basis because of the access and convenience of that for him.
Sure.
That's a wonderful story. And so do you feel like most of your patients that you see right now are more in a remote access setting or a more rural setting?
Yeah, I mean, for my particular clinic, the vast majority of them are CMS insurance, and the issue is that they don't have a subspecialist to see for their allergy or asthma care or even immunology. And so that tends to be more of the patients I see because of that.
Now, is it possible to do allergy in some of the other methods that you mentioned? For example, the non-facilitated?
Yes, Absolutely, and that does occur. There are several companies out there, as well as most of the EMRs now have a platform that you could utilize if you wanted to incorporate that into your practice. And so currently, obviously if you wanted to do skin testing, that isn't something that is routinely done because it's hard to do on yourself, nor do we want that to occur. And so in those patients, I'll send blood work for serum IgE. But I've also had patients where I did that. They would come up to the main clinic several hours away from them to receive their first shot, and then I send the rest of the shots down to their primary care physician to administer the rest that's closer to their home. So that's one way to do that. Another benefit of seeing patients via telemedicine, whether it's facilitated or non-facilitated, and probably non-facilitated will work really well in this manner, is that imagine you're in private practice and your ideal is utilize your slots you have during the day for your patients. But if you have a no-show, it's hard to fill that slot immediately. But if you had telemed incorporated into your practice, someone that's at work would be more likely to pop into that slot to be seen versus finding someone to drive into clinic to come fill that slot. So it's another way to utilize slots well in your practice too.
So do you feel like there are any limitations in terms of the diagnoses that you see? For instance, in asthmatics, how do you follow their spirometry?
Right. So there are peripherals available for spirometry. So I do that in my clinic currently. The things that are really boundaries for our particular practice are things that require the procedures. So, for example, the skin prick testing, you would not be able to do, but you could utilize labs in place of that. In addition, food challenges or other oral ingestion challenges would not be something you would want to do in that manner as well, to be safe. And then, but other than that, there aren't really other limitations per se, especially in the facilitated type.
Wasn't there a recent paper on the use of telemedicine for penicillin skin testing?
There was a paper that was, it came out in 2018, and what they did was they were utilizing the telemedicine for antibiotic stewardship. And so to be able to do the testing remotely, for example, so the physicians were maybe in a clinic outside of the hospital, and so then that testing would occur in the hospital, and via telemedicine, they were able to view the testing results, and then were able to delabel patients in that manner.
Wow, that sounds really convenient. And certainly if anything we can do to extend existing allergy immunology services, especially underneath areas, sounds fantastic. Obviously, we have an existing infrastructure through your hospital that sort of sets this up. Children's Healthcare of Atlanta has this existing site and the nurse and that sort of thing. So for the regular garden variety allergist, let's say they wanted to get started just to figure out where they could get set up with the training or infrastructure, what choices would they have, or where would they get started?
Yeah, so we actually, as a task force, had come up with what I would sort of call a consumer reports, essentially on several of the companies that currently exist that have different platforms for telemedicine. And you can do this several ways. You can either utilize your EMR currently and be able to use that software and platform to see patients through your EMR, which most of them have that available currently. You could use a third-party company, and you wouldn't even necessarily have to have your own practice. You could do it as a consultant or even employee of some of these existing companies now. And you can do a lot of that most easily as an on-demand type service with them. And I usually advise that if it's something you kind of want to just trial or try out, that's maybe a good way to do it, so that you're not sort of totally committing financially to a program that you're going to buy for your own practice.
What is the overhead that goes into it?
There are a lot of costs that vary significantly between companies depending on kind of what package you would like to utilize. So probably best is checking with the specific companies. Some of those numbers are actually on that sort of review we did with the college of a lot of these companies. And it's going to vary between like how much service you want from them. So some of them will come up with an app for you, design a logo for you, help with your scheduling, billing, kind of the whole works, versus, if you just are a consultant and you're just going on for on-demand type visits, that's going to be a lot less.
So I'll be honest with you, I've never actually used the telemedicine method to connect with doctors. So what is the awareness of patients about these options? How do they learn about them? And let's say I did sign up. Is there patients just going to be waiting for me? I just don't know what the demand is.
Yeah, so the demand's actually quite high, more than I think we sometimes as physicians even realize. Currently, if you ask your friends, many of them have probably already utilized this through their own insurance company. So you can actually go through your insurance company. For example, say you have pink eye, and this is the on-demand type. You may pay a fee of $25, see a physician who use your, say, smartphone's camera to look at the pink eye. They send a prescription for you by e-prescribing to the pharmacy, and you're done with your visit.
So I could go to my insurance company's website right now, and they could connect me?
Some of them, yes.
That's amazing. I had no idea. My goodness.
But see, that is another reason why we want to be involved in it, because we as allergists want to be able to have a voice in how we see our patients and the quality of care, right, for telemedicine and how this moves forward in the future. We don't want necessarily other third parties dictating what that looks like for our patients.
Oh, wow. I had no idea. That's just so... I guess I'm out of the loop. That's the problem.
We're not cool.
That's right. Well, I mean, I guess one other thing is the fact that since it's all computerized, we always think of that personal connection you have with a patient. We're making eye contact. You might touch the patient if they're upset about something and provide comfort. We sort of think of these personal touches as part of the doctor-patient relationship. Is telemedicine more of like a one-off thing for these short, quick pink eye things, or do you think you can have meaningful long-term relationships through telemedicine?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. That is a concern I think that a lot of people have. How do you maintain that doctor-patient relationship? And I think, telemedicine isn't there to necessarily take the place of, all your visits necessarily, but it's there to add as a service to patients, and also a service that patients seem to want. There's a lot of data that patients don't necessarily go to their primary care doctor, and they are going more to these urgent care or minute clinic type of visits out of convenience, because, we don't have as much anymore the sort of idea of your home doctor who comes and makes house calls. But this is a way you can make a house call, literally, in the patient's home, but not physically have to be there. So, I guess sort of it will be seen in the future if it's something that people decide that they don't want because they don't feel like they have the connection with their physician. But there are some studies out there showing there is increase in satisfaction because of cost and access is sort of the main reasons that are stated in a lot of these surveys. And that may be something that people want more. And we do live in a society now where we have immediate gratification with Uber, Instacart, Amazon Prime here in Atlanta. You can get something in 2 hours even. And it's sort of just driven by the wants of essentially our patients too. In my clinic, I can speak to I have seen some of these patients for several years, and I do see them as new patients as well as follow-up. And they're excited to see me. I'm excited to see them. I know about their family, their siblings, their pets. I know that they are in the school band, and their big thing is going to the football games on Friday nights for their high school. So I do feel like I do have a relationship with those patients, and I will say that, I've actually gone down to that city, which is where most of my patients are, about 4.5 hours away, and I spoke to them at their asthma camp, and some of them I was surprised to say, oh, you're much taller than I thought you were, or things like that. But when I showed up there, many of them ran and gave me a hug.
Oh, wow.
So to them, and maybe even for some of the generation now, maybe I'm old now, but they're used to interacting with the world via sort of an electronic device. So for them, maybe it isn't so different, and maybe in the future, it's just sort of the norm.
Right. So overall, do you feel like your experience has been as effective as delivering care in a standard outpatient setting?
I do, with the example of the patient I mentioned earlier, certainly his interaction was more successful than we were for probably 3 years trying to have him come face-to-face in the severe asthma clinic. So I do feel that there is still success out there for those patients. In fact, there was a paper by Jay Portnoy that looked at asthma care and the outcomes between face-to-face visits and telemedicine, and essentially it was either the same or better.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Well, I have to ask this question because I know it's going to come up. If I'm going to spend a certain amount of hours in the day seeing patients live or telemedicine, is it really worth my time? I.e., do you actually get compensated equivalent for the work that you put in, or you can expect like a hit in your income when you do something like this?
Right. So the best answer is maybe.
Sure.
Because, and the reason I say that is because between state to state, there are different regulations. Currently, most of the states in the U.S. do have parity of pay between a face-to-face visit versus a telemedicine visit. So if you live in those states that have that parity of pay, then yes, you will be compensated in an equal manner. Now, the other difference is if you do non-facilitated visits, that's sort of a whole different ball game. And I share this in my talk sometimes, but there is this physician who has a blog, and I kind of looked at what his numbers were because he decided one day he was going to get up and just see a bunch of telemedicine patients, and the non-facilitated type, and see how many he sees in one day and how much he would make. And so he did that for 13 hours one day. 13 right, nonstop, which no one's really going to do on a regular basis, right? But I kind of took the numbers that he made, and I sort of extrapolated that to, okay, let's just say you did a normal 40-hour work week, and you gave yourself 5 weeks vacation. What would that come out to? And again, this is without any fees or upfront costs to the telemedicine itself. But with those hours and what he made just with that day, extrapolated out to a year would have been over $400,000 that he would have made.
You're kidding me.
No.
That is unbelievable.
Again, that is not with, the fees and your
right.
upfront costs and some of the other stuff. So it's a very rough estimate, but still, it was very surprising to me, I'll say.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow. 13 hours. That guy was a machine. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
Did he go to the bathroom? I'm just kidding. I'm embarrassed to ask this question, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
So I've been reading a lot about this future of work automation stuff. Certainly, there are ideas that artificial intelligence can get to a point where they could read chest x-rays and CT scans. right? So that's direct competition with radiology. Do you think there's a dark future in allergy where blood testing and a questionnaire can replace an allergist?
No, I mean, I don't. And it kind of harkens back to the patient-doctor relationship. Whether that's in face-to-face or over a TV screen, there is, something about human nature where sometimes they just want a person there that they can explain things to. And I don't think the artificial intelligence in that manner would replace a person. So no, I don't think so. But I do think, for physicians, we will be short and are short physicians currently. And so for us to be in multiple places at once or to be able to give patients access and better care, this is a potential way to do that.
All right. Is there anything you think everyone else should know about telemedicine? This has been really interesting.
Yeah. I think it's just something. What I find when I go around is people have a hard time, they're interested in it, but they're not sure how to get past that point. How do I actually start doing it? So there's a lot of work being done, and between both our national organizations, there's a lot of material and help and tips on both those sites to help you in that manner. And you can always call your EMR and just ask too.
All right. Well,
thank you, Jen.
Yes, thank you so much for coming.
This was so fun.
Interesting.
Yeah, this was a fascinating podcast. I was just listening completely rapt with attention. I'm sure that all of our listeners are. It's
well, good. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed it.
And so if you really enjoyed this podcast, I just want to remind everyone that there is ratings on iTunes and so on. Please give us a good review. And we are always interested in your feedback or corrections or suggestions. The email to reach one of us is allergytalk, one word, @acaai.org. The ACAAI is presenting this podcast for educational purposes only. It is not for medical advice or intended to replace the judgment of a licensed physician. The college is not responsible for any claims related to the procedures, professionals, products, or methods discussed in the podcast, and it does not approve or endorse any products, professional services, or methods that might be referenced. Today's speakers have the following disclosures. Dr. Lee was on an advisory board for Teva. Dr. Kalangara has received consulting fees from AstraZeneca. And Dr. Shih was on an advisory board for Teva and Tekeda. The ACAAI is presenting this podcast for educational purposes only. It is not medical advice or intended to replace the judgment of a licensed physician. The college is not responsible for any claims related to the procedures, professionals, products, or methods discussed in the podcast, and it does not approve or endorse any products, professionals, services, or methods that might be referenced. Today's speakers have the following disclosures. Dr. Lee was on an advisory board for Teva. Dr. Kalangara has received consulting fees from AstraZeneca, and Dr. Feynman has been a speaker for AZBI, Shire, and has done research for AImmune, DBV, Shire, and Regeneron.